need to mute it.
Can you see the signs behind us?
Yeah.
And what direction are they facing?
Okay.
Very disconcerting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
See if anyone's joined. So 7 people. You can say hi and we're waiting.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Hugo Tagholm. I'm the Chief Executive of Surfers Against Sewage, and welcome to our Friday night webinar on Generation C and ocean conservation and the Environment Bill. I'm here with Amy Mount from Greener UK, who is going to take us through some of the process that will be happening in the next few months to help us have the strongest possible protections for the environment. We're having people join us now from right around the country and further afield. And we're really grateful for all of your support and your time on a Friday evening to have this conversation. This really important conversation. We're going to be kicking off the debate in a few minutes. So stay with us, and we're going to be with you shortly to answer many questions, some of which have been submitted up front, and we're going to be polling you two during the webinar to see how you feel about certain issues around our coastline. So thanks for your support, and we're going to be talking to you live shortly. That's Ben, by the way. Can we just go for it?
Yeah, I think we've got 18 people joining. It's not. We'll give it a little bit longer. I can't make it. If you just practice with the Q&A, there's a button at the bottom which should have, I'm just testing a question with you. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
I've just written testing questions.
Yep, fine. So I have to bring it up.
Great. I don't know how to make this co-host.
But are we ready to kick off?
Kick off.
Well, welcome everyone. You've seen the sort of the teething problems of pre-production of our first ever Friday night webcast and webinar for Generation C. We've had incredible interest around this campaign since we first sort of polled you over Christmas to get your views on ocean protection, on the issues affecting our oceans and beaches, and the opportunity to bring in and enforce even stronger laws to protect our oceans and make sure the UK is one of the strongest nations in the world to implement marine protection for the future. I'm here with Amy Mount.
Hello.
From Greener UK, who will be answering some of your questions with us and taking you through some of the process that we're going to be facing over the next few months with the Environment Bill and with ocean protection. I wanted to sort of kick off with a little bit of sort of context around Surfers Against Sewage and around the campaign, what we're doing together, why we're having this conversation, why now, and where we've come from historically. Some of you on the webcast, I'm sure, might remember the early days of Surfers Against Sewage back in 1990. We were formed in Cornwall, where we're still based today, because of the then chronic sewage pollution issue that was affecting beaches right around the country. And it was literally making surfers and other water users, holiday makers, people using our beaches sick when they went into the sea. Lots of sewage-related debris was washing up on our beaches, and there was a real crisis. Some of my former colleagues, some of my ongoing friends were there to launch this amazing new movement, Surfers Against Sewage, which was calling for change. This emergence of Surfers Against Sewage happened at a time that sweeping environmental legislation was coming in from Europe, amazing new powerful pieces of legislation like the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, the Water Framework Directive, and lots of other environmental protections, which have done dramatic things for our coastline over that period of time. When we started as an organisation, only 27% of our beaches would have passed the minimum bathing water standards. Today, that's almost 100% for England and Wales. An amazing piece of progress, thanks to some powerful campaigning from my friends and colleagues at Surfers Against Sewage, but also thanks to brilliant pieces of legislation, brilliant campaigning from other organisations, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, many other stakeholders around this ecosystem. And so that's where we've come from as a charity. Of course, we've broadened our scope over the last 3 decades. And one of the big issues we're working on today is the new sewage, really, plastic pollution on our coastline, and also climate change, which is intimately linked with ocean protection and conservation. But for many of you, and many of the questions that we've seen and have submitted prior to this webinar, for many of you, plastic pollution is the real issue. It's what we see at our beaches and what we mobilise around, not just with beach cleans, but taking your voice to Westminster to talk to politicians around solutions, to call for businesses to change how they're doing business, and really call for the right laws and implementation of laws to control and stop plastic pollution on our beaches. And so that's a real theme that we're going to come to in some of the questions. And that's why we're using now this opportunity of the Environment Bill in the summer to bring together the various strands of action that we have, from beach cleaners to plastic-free communities, to our all-party parliamentary group in Westminster, to ensure that we have the right laws moving forward for the UK, and ensure that they're enforced in the best possible way, and that we don't see any backsliding of environmental standards in the country, and indeed that we work together as a positive movement to have the very best possible marine protection policies and legislation in this country, and to ensure that it's enforced in the most progressive and proactive way with full resourcing behind it. I'm going to hand over now to Amy, who's going to talk to us much more.
Just a quick thing off camera. If you come away from the table, because the camera wobbles, we've just had that's our first bit of feedback.
Good feedback.
And the second, if you just mention there's a Q&A button at the bottom, and that's where people can submit their Q&As.
I've had a bit of housekeeping come in before I hand over to Amy. It'd be unfair to hand over the housekeeping. That the table's wobbling because of my leaning on the table. So apologies to everyone who has been made seasick from that. At least it's thematic. And secondly, if you want to submit a question during the Q&A, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit it there. We have one of our colleagues, Ben Hewitt here, our campaign director, who is fielding those questions and who will bring them into the conversation. So without further ado, I wanted to hand across to Amy, who's going to tell us much more eloquently about the processes that we're now going through, explain sort of why now, why are we building this new movement for the environment, not just the marine environment. So Amy, welcome, and thank you for taking your time to participate in the webinar today.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me, and hi everybody. Thanks for joining the conversation. And as Hugo said, it is a really significant time. So I run a coalition of lots of different environmental organisations who came together in the aftermath of the EU referendum to make sure that, on the one hand, that the UK leaving the European Union doesn't weaken any of our existing environmental protections. As Hugo mentioned, a lot of our policy comes from the EU at the moment, so we need to make sure that we're not losing that as the UK is leaving. And secondly, if this is going to be a time of big political change and lots of things being thrown up in the air, can we make sure, or do our best to make sure that when everything lands again, it lands in a way that is better for the environment, because we know that the environment is not in a good place. And even if the referendum hadn't happened, the environment would not be in a good place. So there's two kind of things happening here. One is Brexit, and one is the really shocking sort of environmental degradation that we're seeing around the UK and around the world. And we need to try and grapple with both of those things together. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the specifics on Brexit, and then why this new environment bill is going to be so important. So, as I said, around 80% of our environmental law stems from the EU. So that includes things like the Bathing Water Directive and a whole host of other things affecting lots of different aspects of the environment. But it's not just the standards themselves, it's how they're enforced. So the EU and its institutions and the European Court of Justice play a really important role in making sure that governments are actually upholding those standards. So in the worst case scenario, if a government is just ignoring something completely, the EU can take that government to court, as we're seeing at the moment with air quality standards in our cities, for example. But as also happened in the past, happened recently actually with harbour porpoises. So the EU said to the UK, look, you're just not doing enough to protect this really important species, and you need to set up many more protection areas. So it has real impact. And of course, environmental issues cross borders. They don't just sit inside one country. So that's why international cooperation is important too. And whether you're looking at something like climate change that requires different countries to work together to reduce emissions, or something like fisheries, where fish swim around different seas from coast to coast, and if you don't manage them in a collaborative way, the actions of one country could undermine the fishing opportunities and the marine ecosystems in another country. But as I said, it is also a time of political change, and where there's change, there's opportunity. So we've already seen actually that it has started to energise some of the political debates here. A lot of environmental policy, because it was done in the EU, meant that we didn't have those conversations so much here in the UK. And we're already seeing that there's starting to be a lot more debate about the environment in Parliament as some of this Brexit legislation is going through, which is an upside. You know, we need our elected representatives to be thinking about these issues and thinking about what's the best way to protect the environment. So as I said, we have a broad coalition in Green UK. We're really pleased to be working with Surfers Against Sewage. There's also organisations like Greenpeace, the National Trust, the RSPB. You can look on our website to see the full list. And we've been working to influence not just the EU negotiations, but all the associated bits of law that have to get through Parliament to make Brexit work. And we're making some headway. So we worked with MPs from lots of different parties to get an amendment. So you might remember there was an EU withdrawal bill last year, if you're a close follower of politics. So off the back of that campaigning, we've got the government to commit to a new environment bill, so a new law for the environment. And this could be a really good opportunity, because if it does what we want it to do, it will fill the gaps that have been left by Brexit, so like that gap in enforcement, by creating a new environmental body that can continue to hold the government to account. But ideally, it can also put a duty on government to leave the environment in a better state and put some objectives into law saying, we want healthy seas, we want to have sustainable use of resources, and really make sure that this government and future governments have to deliver those objectives. I think we need a note on just the different scenarios that we're facing at the moment. There's some important votes next week. The next stage of the Brexit process is still not clear what kind of Brexit we're going to have, whether MPs are going to approve the Prime Minister's deal, whether it will be a different version of the deal, whether there might be a cliff edge exit, which would be really disruptive and something we're very worried about from an environmental perspective. I can talk about that if people are interested. And there's still actually a chance that Brexit might not happen at all. So all these things are still on the table. I think the important thing is, no matter what kind of Brexit we have, we need to make sure we've got stronger standards in law, and that we've got the institutions that can make sure they're implemented, and that we continue to cooperate with the EU on these really important issues. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, for that great run through. That was really helpful. And I think, just to sort of draw out a couple of key points there. As you said, our oceans are already in crisis. So we already have a plastic pollution crisis. We've seen the impacts of climate change really affecting big swathes of our ocean. We're seeing the decimation of some species in our ocean. We're seeing potentially the spectre of sewage pollution come back in some places. Indeed, we're already being taken to the European Courts of Justice, are already bringing the UK, taking them to task because of sewage pollution through combined sewer overflows up in the northeast of England. So we're seeing lots of things that we need to take stronger action on, whether we're fully out of Europe or whether indeed there's a sort of softer Brexit scenario. So it's really important that we work on the strongest possible laws together, and that's what we're here to discuss today. I think I've been handed a note that we're gonna go and do a quick poll of the issues I think that you sort of care most about, and you'll excuse our how do we do this poll here?
Is it the next one along at the bottom?
Hold on, bear with us. Where are we? Sorry. Okay, here we go. We're going to see, we'd love your responses to this poll, which we're just putting up about the issues that you feel are most pressing at the moment. So please do respond, and we'll come back to you with the results of that. I don't know if you can see it live.
Looks like some people are filling it in already. That's great.
Yeah, so thanks again for your time. And we're going to check in on questions now. Are we ready to go to the questions? Thanks again for everyone who's taking up their Friday evening. We don't know if this time is suboptimal from an engagement point of view, or whether it's the best time. But thanks for everyone who's joined us. We had hundreds of people come back to us wanting to be part of this evening's webinar, and it's something that we continue. We'll continue to do as we build the campaign. And we're going to start running through the questions. So the first one we've got is from Alistair. I haven't got your location, Alistair, but you asked about the solutions around plastic pollution, particularly, whether we should be focused on large-scale technology in the ocean to remove plastics, whether we should be looking at alternatives, biodegradable and compostable plastics, or whether we need better education in developing countries. I think it's a really broad question. From our point of view, the key is reduction. We've got to stop the amount of plastic that is being produced at the moment. Already we have a plastic pollution crisis, and the projections for plastic production are pretty shocking. In the next few decades, we're going to see a quadrupling of plastic production. And we simply don't have the systems to contain and control that much plastic. So the two things we think that we need after reduction are the materials and the systems revolution to happen in unison. We need the systems to be able to control and recycle materials that we have. And we need those materials to not cause harm as they do in the environment at the moment. In terms of education in developing countries, we certainly need investment in those countries for their own recycling and for their own waste management systems. And all too often we're exporting the problem to these developing countries. So there's already calls for a moratorium on exportation of our plastic waste. That should really fuel a domestic recycling industry that will create green jobs, lower carbon emissions, and be good for stopping ocean plastic pollution. So in short, the toolkit is very broad. I don't think personally, and from a surface against sewage point of view, that going right to the center of the ocean when plastic has had all of its journey is the right place to try and intercept that plastic. Indeed, we can stop it at source and we can reduce it at source. And that's probably the better way around and the more cost-effective way around to do it. Amy,
I think that's a really good point. And, it's about all the upstream action, really. Prevention is better than cure, isn't it? So if you can think of alternatives to plastics, but basically reduce the resources that we're consuming. The biodegradable point is a tricky one, actually, because I think with a lot of these biodegradable options, actually they're creating microplastics as they degrade. So you do have to be careful that in trying to solve one problem, you don't create another. But definitely room for technical solutions, as well as getting the systems in place and the behaviour change.
Absolutely, and just to sort of to finalise on that point, it's very, if we have more biodegradable plastics in the system, we need a proper waste stream for those to go into, or compostable plastics, should I say, that will then compost naturally and produce the right resource out of that composting process. At the moment, if we've got compostable plastics and they go into the normal waste stream, that's not a good solution. That is still challenging. So it's about systems and a materials revolution. We've had the next question. Should we take one from?
Yeah, there's a more sort of one about the politics and the parliamentary process, which is quite interesting, from Malcolm, which he asks, how do we get a really good environment bill if MPs aren't interested? And he's pointed to the example of there was a climate change debate last week in Parliament, and not very many MPs turned up. So there's a few things to unpack there. I think one of the main things to say is that in my experience talking with MPs from a range of parties, actually most of them do care about the environment, and they are interested. They've got a lot of issues competing for their attention, and that's why it's really important that groups like Surfers Against Sewage and other organisations that we're working with are working with people like you to put pressure on MPs, whether that's through showing that you care by doing things like beach cleans, or whether it's getting in touch with them directly as your elected representatives. So that's a really important thing, and it's why it's also important for us to be working together as environmental organisations, because by having a united voice on these issues, we can cut through some of the noise and all the political debate and say, let's keep focused on what's really important, and the future of our planet and our beaches and our marine mammals and everything is really important here, and we shouldn't be losing sight of that. On the climate change debate last week, it was a shame. I think it was the first time in 2 years that climate change has been debated in Parliament. But the timing, I think, there was quite an interesting debate after that, I think on Twitter, between Lisa Nandy MP and Caroline Lucas. So Lisa Nandy was saying, actually, Thursdays are a really important day for going and talking to our constituents and finding out what they care about. A lot of the MPs were back in their constituencies. So I don't think we should get too disheartened just by that one event, although it is disheartening. It's disheartening that the government isn't making space for these debates and whipping their MPs to go and get involved. But I wouldn't take that as a kind of definitive indication of a lack of interest. I think there's other things to consider. And what's really great here is that the Environment Bill will be hopefully proposed by government and introduced to Parliament, so MPs will have to engage with it, because it will be a major piece of legislation that's going through the process. So rather than something that's a bottom-up initiative from MPs like the debate last week was.
Yeah, I'd add to that. I think we're working hard from the beachfront right to the front benches of Parliament to influence hearts and minds. We now mobilise one of the biggest beach clean communities in the UK, over 100,000 people taking action to protect their beaches. We often invite MPs to those beach cleans, so we see lots of MPs right around the country and all sorts of constituencies coming out onto their beaches with volunteers to see the problem firsthand, to take action, and to take that experience back to Westminster. And that's a really powerful experience, and that can really help them make decisions. And we can trace back some of those moments where we've taken ministers and politicians to the beach and then seen how the conversation has developed into more serious action.
And how do they tend to react when they come along and see the beach cleans kind of in action?
There's sort of two things that they respond with. Often they're very shocked about the sheer volume of plastic that they see.
I saw an image the other day. I think someone had spent a week picking up micro beads, and they had these massive bags of them.
Absolutely,
I mean, the volume is just on one beach.
It is huge, and there is a plastic pollution crisis, and when they see it firsthand, it's a powerful emotional sort of experience which can help inform them moving forward. Because what they can't dispute is what they see at the beachfront. You know, for all of the evidence they can see submitted on paper or digitally, when they see it firsthand, it's even more shocking and powerful. Second, I think that they often recognize the strength of community feeling and spirit by coming. They see people who really care passionately about their beaches, about their rivers, about their piece of environment around them. And that first-hand witnessing of people being upset about the state of their beaches, seeing the sheer volume of plastic on the beach, and the need for the community to come together to protect it is a powerful experience for the politicians to have. And then from Surfers Against Sewage perspective, you know, it's really important that, you know, we know that we can't just pick our way out of the problem. Beach cleans are a really great signposting exercise for MPs and for our businesses to take more action and to reinvent how we live with plastic, and to hopefully reduce the amount we're using. And of course on all of the other issues too, but that's the most tangible sort of issue. And so we build this movement of people together, and we take that voice to our all-party parliamentary group in Westminster. We've got Surfers Against Sewage runs the only marine conservation all-party parliamentary group called the Ocean Conservation APPG. We've got about 40 members of parliament who sit in that group from a range of parties, from all colours across the political spectrum, and it's there that we discuss the evidence that we find at the beaches, the potential for new legislation, the potential for new policy interventions to ensure that we don't see single-use plastics on our beaches, sewage back in our seas, the degradation of our coastal environment. So that's a powerful voice in Westminster, a very collaborative voice for the ocean, one where we bring together other organisations, brilliant organisations like Greenpeace, like Marine Conservation Society, regulators, businesses, the media, to create sort of a cross-party, cross-industry, multi-stakeholder response to these issues. And so that's a powerful place that we're representing all of you and all of your concerns at.
Cool. Do you want to go over the results of the poll?
Yeah, should we have a look at that? I don't know if you've all seen that, and we'll
Pinged up.
has it pinged up? I think we've stopped here. Close this down. And we've got lots of questions coming in too.
Yeah, lots.
So we've got lots of questions, which I think we'll start running through live too. We've got a couple more of the pre-submitted questions too. The next one, Ivor sent in a question about the problem being in the Pacific Rim, and how does our efforts help there? This in some ways is reflective of a conversation I've had over the last few days, in which we hear regularly raised about the sort of 10 rivers in the world that pollute our oceans with plastic. And we, as an organisation, feel that this is somewhat unfair, because indeed the problem may be centralised there, but it's often due to other more developed nations exporting their plastics to these countries, and those plastics then escaping into the environment where there's not the right waste management or recycling sort of facilities, which can be a real issue. We also have plastics which is really interlinked with poverty, where people without enough money are sold lots of products in single-use unrecyclable sachets and packaging, that there simply is no way to collect that packaging, there's no way to recycle that packaging, and it escapes into the environment because there's no waste management system. So indeed, this is really a corporate responsibility issue. This is about big business doing things differently. This is about us recycling our own waste domestically, so we're not adding plastic miles. Indeed, I think there's a new early day motion in Parliament at the moment, which has been launched by our friends at A Plastic Planet, calling for the exportation of plastics to be stopped. And so, there's lots of issues around plastic getting into the environment in other countries, but often that's interlinked with the single-use plastics we're using in all of our great cities, in all of our communities, and in our busy day-to-day lives. So we can't separate those two things too much. We're going to go into another poll now. So let's just bring that up. Thanks for everyone for for participating in the first poll. I'm just trying to find out how to do this. Poll number 2 is coming your way. We'd like to know what you think about where the pressure should lie on solving the plastic pollution issue. Should it be with governments? Should it be big business? Or should it be citizens who are most responsible for solving the plastic pollution crisis? So we'd love to know your thoughts and how we put all of those ideas together to create the solutions, because we've all got a part to play. But who's most responsible for solutions to plastic pollution in our oceans and in the wider environment? Indeed, we should probably just talk about plastic being everywhere, in our air, in our water, on our beaches, in our fields, in our city streets. It is everywhere. Amy, do you want to pick the next question to come through?
I've got a Brexity question here from Edward, who asked about sewage control after March the 29th. So as we probably all have had drummed into our heads by now, March 29th is probably the day the UK leaves the EU. I say probably because a number of the options on the table at the moment involve either extending the negotiating period, what's called the Article 50 period, or, as I said, that there is an initiative from the People's Vote campaign to get a second referendum. There'll be lots of people trying to get their way next week in Parliament, so we'll see. But so there's sort of two scenarios where sewage control could really change, I think, after March the 29th. One is if we fall out of the EU without a deal, because then all those processes that we have, the role of the EU in making sure, and all its agencies and helping governments make sure they're delivering these standards, like sewage standards, that will straight away fall away. And the problem is that the environment bill that we've been talking about won't even have entered Parliament at that point. So we won't have got the new mechanisms that have been proposed to create a new green watchdog that can make sure the government is still imposing those standards. So we've been calling this a governance gap, and it's something we're really worried about. The standards themselves are pretty much going to be converted from EU law into the domestic law book. That was what the EU withdrawal bill did. And it's been quite a complicated, very technical process of bringing all these laws over. But so the standards should be there in more or less the same form. We're a bit worried about how quickly that process has happened, because mistakes could be made, gaps could open up that nobody's really noticed. But roughly the laws will still be there. It's the big question is how they'll be enforced. And actually, even if we leave the EU with a deal and there's a transition period, this new green watchdog that's been proposed will be really important, this new environmental body. And at the moment, it doesn't have powers that really match up to the powers that the EU has. So, for example, being able to fine governments if they're really not doing anything, being really recalcitrant on these issues. So there's a lot of work to do still on those proposals, but the sort of really big change would be if it's a no deal situation after March the 29th.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, I think what we'd add to that. I opened up, and for those of you who weren't here at the beginning, I talked a little bit about the potted history of Surfers Against Sewage, which, of course, as our name says, was launched as a brilliant single issue campaign group that was focused on ending marine sewage disposal, and it came into being when new law came in from Europe to help stop sewage pollution. That's had great effect, but it's under threat now with the processes politically that we're seeing. And we're responding to that. So already Surfers Against Sewage tracks a great number of sewage spills from our combined sewer overflows right around the country. So we're seeing thousands of pollution spills still in this country. They are legal because they're permitted by and large, but there are too many of them. In some cases where they exceed those legal parameters, we're being taken to the European Courts of Justice for the abuse of those combined sewer overflows, to basically discharge sewage much more freely into our ocean. We're working through our all-party parliamentary group on some new powers, a new bill to enable the Environment Agency to fine water companies much more heavily to control that sewage pollution. So that's something that's underway. And indeed, I think will make its way into the Environment Bill, which is going to be a very complex piece of legislation. I think there's thousands of different parts to it.
Well, I mean, who knows what they'll manage to get in, but yeah, it could be a very big bill indeed.
So we're already working on that. I think the bottom line is we've made so much progress on water quality over the last few years, but there is a real risk with climate changing, with the political dynamics that are currently underway, and with the testing regime, so how we're testing and looking at the quality of our water diminishing. We're concerned that there could be some slipping around that.
I think it's an important point that about the size of the bill, because at the moment, all the government has said they will do is create a new body and carry over what are called environmental principles, which are some of the really kind of basic building blocks of EU environmental law that we need to make sure that we don't lose as the UK leaves the EU. So that's the sort of minimum picture on the table right now. And what we're wanting is that the government think much more ambitiously about this bill and see it as an opportunity for a really transformative bit of legislation, and puts in that forward-facing stuff as well. So saying, actually, how can we take what we've got, build on it, but do something that's much better, much stronger. So we're really starting to grapple with the fact that our waterways are not as healthy as they should be. Our air quality is way dirtier than it should be, and the declines in wildlife and that sort of thing. So that's why it's really important that that people like you get involved and make your voices heard, because the government will, one of the main things that's going to affect what the government decides to do with this bill is the amount of pressure that they get from the public and whether they feel like this is something that actually really matters to people.
And that is why Generation C is so important, that we really unite. Particularly, and it's a good moment to reflect on that, as a really positive voice for the ocean and for the environment. The more of us that come together as a positive force to influence our MPs, to make sure our feelings are heard for a really ambitious environment bill, the stronger it can be. So this is part of that journey, and we're really grateful for everyone's involvement. We're going to come on to the next poll. Thanks to everyone who submitted their views, their options on the poll. I'm going to share that with you all now. We've seen clearly that people feel big business is the most responsible for solving the plastic pollution crisis. What was that?
82%.
82%.
Oh, right. So I was worried that you had to choose between different options, which I would have found really difficult.
So 82% of people felt big business. And so people could have choose in order, I believe. 57% is government. 53%. Sorry, that's my poor eyesight despite the glasses. And then 27% citizens. And so clearly people feel that this is an industry and government responsibility to solve the crisis. And those two stakeholders here can work in symbiosis. The right government policy and legislation can create the conditions for business to operate in a more sustainable way that emits less plastic, that emits less carbon, that does things in a way that protects the planet in a bigger way. I think this brings us on also to another part of the questions that we've had submitted sort of early on around littering. Who's responsible to clean up sort of litter? How do we get the public involved? We've heard from Sue in Newcastle upon Tyne. We've had people, Emma has asked about littering being an increasing problem. Have we got any plans for an anti-littering campaign? maybe in collaboration with schools. So there's been some themes around litter. And for Surfers Against Sewage, we feel that actually the plastic pollution crisis isn't simply a littering issue. There's so much plastic being produced. The systems to recycle that plastic and reuse it and capture it simply haven't kept pace with the production of plastics, particularly single-use plastics, and in some cases, pointless plastics in the environment. So we feel it's much more than just a littering issue. People need the right systems to contain and control this plastic. A deposit return system is something we've been campaigning for. We've been campaigning for a number of years with our friends and colleagues at Greenpeace and Campaign to Protect Rural England and the Marine Conservation Society. So we've all been coming together in this space to call for the systems that can really help us stop plastic pollution. To give you a couple of sort of quick statistics, we use about 38 million plastic bottles in the UK every single day, and only just over half of those are captured for recycling. Indeed, whether they're recycled or not is still a question. Now, a deposit return system is something that works in many countries for millions of people very effectively. A great system that can capture almost 100% of plastic bottles in some places and create much purer recyclate, which can go back into new bottles and be recycled and reprocessed domestically to reduce plastic miles, to create a green economy and green jobs, and to stop plastic pollution. So the public really need the right systems in place and the right receptacles, if you will, to be able to put this plastic waste in and create a much more circular economy. In terms of sort of anti-littering messaging, we're working very closely with schools and other community groups. We know that there's been recently a big anti-littering sort of poster campaign that's been launched. Whether or not these are really effective tools in terms of the big poster campaigns, but at a more granular level, we work with hundreds of schools and hundreds of thousands of school children on our Plastic-Free Schools campaign. We're working in hundreds of communities, which represent millions of citizens, through our Plastic-Free Communities campaign, all advocating reducing the amount of plastic we're using, getting rid of pointless plastics, creating a more local circular economy. So there's lots of measures that we can take that we're really focused on and really investing our charity resources in taking the public on a journey with us. And I'm sure many of you have been part of the plastic-free movement or the refill movement, all of these great things that are helping us decouple from plastic pollution.
I think it's really interesting what an impact Blue Planet had. When was that? Over a year ago as well.
Yeah,
like
a year and a half ago, yeah.
I mean, I follow lots of MPs on Twitter because I work in politics, trying to influence them, and I think some of them had got this sort of instruction from Conservative Party HQ that they should all tweet about Blue Planet when it was happening and about how important plastics is, which was good that they felt like this would be something that would resonate with the public. And I have, even in my own life, I've become way more aware of single-use plastic since seeing that, because it's something about the visuals, isn't there? Like seeing that poor little turtle kind of with plastic tangled up in it, and like really just graphic representations of the impact that we're having without necessarily being aware. And I've definitely seen it around people who my family and friends, that people are much more aware now of the impact that plastic is happening. But I think these sorts of campaigns are hugely important for kind of giving people a bit of agency in that context as well, and saying it's okay, there's things, this isn't all your fault.
Yeah.
as a human being. It can be very hard to avoid using these materials, and what we need is proper systems for either making sure that producers are just cutting down the amount of plastic they're using, or that if you have to use plastic, then there's an easy way to recycle it and know that value will be captured back into the supply chain again. So it's really important kind of that we get that policy right.
Well, it's really interesting, and it is a toolkit. I think we need to make sure people are sort of trapped in some ways in this sort of plastic ecosystem, and it can be hard to break out. There are some simple solutions, the reusable shopping bag, the refillable water bottle, all of these things, the bamboo toothbrush, all of these things, but there is much more than that too, and we do need new systems, and we need the materials revolution to give us a new way to operate as a society, but at the pace that we need. It's really interesting you mentioned the Blue Planet, and there have been some great broadcasting and some great journalism around plastic pollution. We've seen it in the UK at the top of the news agenda for sort of almost 2 years. I don't think this is the same in every country around the world. So it's great that people are taking notice and taking action. I had the really good fortune last year to do a talk with the producer of the Blue Planet, James Honeyborn, an incredible guy who had, filmed these amazing scenes of this wonderful marine wildlife and this ecosystem that we all sort of love. And there was one statistic that really stuck out for me in all of the storytelling that he gave on that day, which was out of the 7 hours, I think it was, of broadcasting of the Blue Planet, which was a series about the ocean, not about plastic. Only 14 minutes was dedicated to plastic pollution. 14 minutes that has changed how politicians are responding to the issue. 14 minutes which has changed how business is responding to it. 14 minutes which has mobilized communities around the world on plastic pollution. And 14 minutes which certainly made me and Surfers Against Sewage a lot busier in this space. So, an amazing bit of communication, and showing just how effective one strong bit of communication can be delivered in the right place at the right time to the right people. So really interesting. And there've been other great, campaigns around this. Sky Ocean Rescue, of course, has been doing lots of leadership in this space and supporting lots of individual campaigns. And we've seen all of our national newspapers of, the whole sort of political spectrum really focused on this issue. So we're, it's really encouraging to see the sheer level of awareness people have for plastic pollution, and also how that is taking people on a new sustainability journey. Plastic is just a gateway issue for people talking about bigger sustainability issues, resource management, climate change, habitat destruction, all of these things that have been hard to grasp. But because the plastic we're finding on our beaches is the same brand profile as what people interact with day to day, it's all become very real for people. So the silver lining to plastic pollution is really that it's awakened the public in terms of the wider sustainability and conservation agenda.
I think it's helped push the environment up the political agenda.
Yeah.
I think there's some other reasons for that as well. Yeah. Like the fact that, at least in the UK, after the general election in 2017, there was a lot of soul searching, and in the Conservative Party, obviously the party that's in government at the moment, thinking, oh, maybe we need to talk about the environment more to reach out to younger people, which is probably true. So that has helped. I think Michael Gove, when he became Secretary of State for the Environment, actually sort of embraced that agenda and really ran with it. And it's been the first time for a long time that we've had a kind of political big hitter in charge of the Environment Department. I think everyone was quite surprised by that appointment. I don't think he necessarily expected it, but he has really he's really energized that department. And it's an issue that is of concern, obviously, to other political parties as well. So it's something where it feels like there's quite a good cross-party consensus on the need to tackle these issues, and that the UK ought to be at the front of that, because A, we've got the power to do so, and B, we've been causing a lot of the problem.
Absolutely. I'm really conscious of the number of questions that we're having coming in, and we've got about 15 minutes left of the Q&A, the webinar. This won't be our last, and we're going to try and get through as much as we can. Apologies in advance to anyone who submitted a question that we don't get to. We're not ignoring you. We're going to look at all of these questions and come back with an update around the whole webinar after this event. So we're going to carry on with some questions now. Should we take some live questions now?
Okay, wow, there's loads. Okay, hang on, let's go right to the top.
See how quickly you go through.
So, who would be responsible for enforcing the new environment bill? Well, ultimately, it's the government's. The UK government has to make sure that environmental law is delivered, and one of the reasons we're really keen for there to be a new environmental watchdog set up is so that there's an independent body that can hold the government to account on behalf of all of us, of all the public, and on behalf of Parliament. So that will be a really important piece of the puzzle. Let's go.
And that would be the Office for Environment.
Yes,
Environmental Protection.
it's going to be called the Office for Environmental Protection. It's a bit of a mouthful, that.
Yeah.
The OEP, we like to call it, where I work. What else have we got? So what are you planning to do on climate change?
It's a really good question, and let's not. Thanks. Who's asked that question?
Sorry, I've lost it.
We've had a question of, plastics is important, but what are we planning to do on climate change? Absolutely good question. And we've been, really, we've been in space for a while actually. So we work as part of the Climate Coalition, which is a big coalition of environmental and development charities coming together at key moments around the environmental debate to campaign together. So we have been active in this space, and we're going to be more active in it. I think there's an important part around climate change that let's not forget that plastic pollution and climate change and fossil fuel emissions, they're interlinked by big oil. They're both driven by big oil. We need to keep that oil in the ground. We shouldn't be pumping it out. We need to look at a new, more sustainable, cleaner future. So these are environmental bedfellows in terms of the stresses on the planet, and we know indeed there's going to be some perversities of sort of action as cars become electric, as that sort of automation happens, then big oil is looking for other outlets for their production, so to speak. We know that 1 in 10 barrels of oil already goes into plastics. That could be set to rise dramatically as we move away from putting petrol in our cars. So there's lots of interconnectivity here.
Also, another aspect of the Environment Bill as well is how the environment is a really important sink for carbon emissions. So if you're looking at peat, for example, up on the moorlands, so what we want the Environment Bill to do is also drive much better management of the land, so that it is capturing carbon and or at least not contributing to more emissions too. So it really is all connected. And our friends in the Climate Coalition doing fantastic work campaigning on climate change as well. Yeah.
So great question. Thank you. Let's move on rapidly through. We're going to try and do as many as we can. So thanks for submitting them so fast. We wish we could read that fast actually.
Okay, so there's a question here from an anonymous about what questions people could ask their MP. And I know that certainly on the Greener UK website, we have a page about how to get involved with the Environment Bill, and there's some links there for different ways you can contact your MP and suggestions for what to ask. Is there anything you guys have on that?
It depends in terms of if you're talking specifically about the Environment Bill directly and how they can engage their MP with that, or if they're talking more generally around some of the sort of more granular sort of legislation that we're talking about and government policy. So, for example, on deposit return systems at the moment, we're going into a big consultation around plastics, and the public voice around that will be important. So, for example, on deposit return systems, there will be questions on how wide that scheme is, how inclusive it is in terms of bottles. There's a suggestion that it should either be everything, all materials, all sizes of bottles, or a very narrow band of bottles, the on-the-go of the bottles as it would be. We suggest that you talk to your MP about making sure that that's as comprehensive as possible, the all-in system, as it were. So there's lots you can access on the SAS website. We're going to be doing some advice and some FAQs around those processes. The consultation deals with much more than just deposit return systems, so there'll be an opportunity to feed back in different ways. But there's various levels in which you can engage, and you can always just ask your MP to come to a beach clean or a plastic pollution pickup in your area. You can go along to question them around what the government is doing in the space on the issues that you really care about. So it's always important to engage with your MP, and they are there to be question. They are there to answer your question. So
Yeah,
please do that.
Don't
be
feel
afraid.
you have to be an expert in any of these areas. What your MP needs to know really is that you care about this stuff and it matters to you, and ultimately it might affect the way you vote on things as well. So I think the important thing is just to you know, ideally you could write to them, or you can even go along to one of their constituency surgeries that they tend to have at the end of the week, at the weekend, and say, look, I really care about these issues. What's your party or what's the government doing about them? And you know, what do you think as a country? Where do you think we should be going with this? Sorry, but the reason we're leaning in is because the writing's quite small on our screen, so we're just leaning in to read the question. Top tip, when you're writing a question, if you could keep it really short as well, then we can read it more quickly.
Yeah, there's some quite detailed questions. That's why we're having a little pause. So apologies for the hiatus.
And there's some of them that have probably been written before we talked, as we were talking, and that we've actually ended up covering already. So there's a question about how Parliament, this is from Ethan, how Parliament uses science to determine environmental policy, which is a really good question. And I think it depends a bit on the area of policy. So one of the things, the UK was one of the first countries to, I think actually the first country to have a Climate Change Act. So that was a world first piece of legislation. And what we're hoping with the Environment Bill is this could also be a world first in terms of its scope and its ambition. And what the Climate Change Act did was set up a committee on climate change. So a committee of experts who come from mostly sort of academic and scientific backgrounds, who could provide independent advice to the government about what sorts of emissions reductions we should be aiming for, and what sorts of policies will actually achieve those reductions successfully. So having that independent advice is really important. And it's something that's it's sort of in question as the UK is leaving the EU, because the EU has this whole system of advice and expertise, and it's able to pool expertise from all the different member states. So one of the agencies that does that is the European Environment Agency. And we think that whatever the future relationship with the European Union, we should try and keep the UK part of that agency so that you can get access to that, to those data and to the expertise that's there, so we can have well-informed policy making.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I'd sort of add to that in terms of the tiers of sort of science and influence and the opportunities to intervene. So, you know, we would bring together experts at our all-party parliamentary group across a range of issues, you know, plastic, water quality, you know, climate, you know, other issues, marine protected areas, to inform a group of MPs who would then have further conversations. So there's a sort of there's a scaling effect you can have. There's the Environmental Audit Committee. We've submitted evidence and presented evidence and been, you know, grilled by the Environmental Audit Committee. So there's all sorts of different platforms. There's the government consultations through which we can submit evidence, scientific evidence, evidence we're collecting at the beaches. So there's lots of different moments to influence. I think it's important that we come together. You know, we always want to, you know, represent our members, the public on their concerns, and take through those concerns into these opportunities to influence. And so, so yeah, never believe that your voice, you know, can't be heard. We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Oh wow, time's flown.
And it's been really great to talk through some of your questions with us. I apologise again for not being able to cover everything. I hope that we'll be able to come back to you and give you some responses sort of offline. I wanted to sum up really where we're sort of going next, and what you can do with Surfers Against Sewage. And it would be great for Amy if you wanted to say a few words about how people can engage further with Greener UK moving forward. But we've got a few things happening in the coming days, which are there as actions for you to take with us. We've got the Mass Unwrap this coming weekend, which is part of our Plastic-Free Communities project and campaign, which is in over 500 communities around the UK, communities representing over 30 million people. And lots of those communities are organising mass unwraps in supermarkets to reject the over packaging of products and give that packaging back at the till. So, check out our website for those. We've also got the Big Spring Beach Clean coming up in April. Check out our website. You can register your own clean. We've got hundreds already registered around the country. But this year we're working from mountaintops right down to the beachfront. So whether you live on the top of a mountain, next to a stream, in the city centre, or on the beachfront, you can do a Big Spring Beach Clean. We can all be part of Generation C, and we can all be ocean activists. And we'll soon be having a new petition launching around Generation C and challenging the government to make sure we have the strongest possible environmental laws to protect our oceans for now and for the future. Amy.
Yeah, so I would really encourage you to get involved with everything that Hugo's just described there. As I mentioned right at the beginning, Greener UK is a coalition of lots of different organisations. So if you're a member of any of those other organisations, whether it's Greenpeace or RSPB or Friends of the Earth, you can see the whole list of them on our website, but do keep an eye out for what they're doing as well, because we're all working together, and wherever you're making your voice heard, that really matters. And it does have an impact as well. MPs really do notice when their constituents are getting in touch and what they're getting in touch about. Do keep positive, and hopefully everybody working together, we can really make a difference this year.
Thank you very much. And thanks again to all of you who've joined us. We're, of course, going to read all of your questions and we'll share our responses via email. It's been really good to talk to you all. Thank you very much for your support. Thanks for your support for all of the organisations working in this space who are doing brilliant work. Thanks to Amy for being with us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation soon. Have a great weekend and goodbye for now. Thank you.